Welcome to Leadr Podcast, the ultimate destination for MedTech insights, leadership inspiration, and the latest innovation. I'm Stephanie Plia, founder of Tribe Agency and your host for Leadr Podcast. Welcome to episode 8 of Leadr Podcast. Today we're joined by Steve Bell. He's a MedTech titan with over $1.5 billion raised for startups and has a track record of building Europe's largest MedTech unicorn. We're diving into robotic revolution in surgery, the intricacies of startup funding, and the balance of work and personal life. So tune into today's episode and let's get into it. Well, welcome to episode 8, if you can believe it, of Leadr Podcast. And I'm thrilled to have my next guest on today. His name is Steve Bell. I'm sure if you're on LinkedIn, you're aware of Steve Bell. He's very good at marketing, amongst other things. So we wanted to grab him on Leadr Podcast. I'm just really intrigued by his presence. And we're going to talk about all kinds of fun stuff. But first of all, welcome to the podcast, Steve.
Thank you very much. And really, thank you very much for having me as well. It's a great pleasure to be here.
Yes. What time is it there? I didn't even ask you this in our pre-call.
Oh, it's 7:12 because I'm based in Rome in Italy. So it's
that's right.
7:12.
Okay.
So it's kind of like wine o'clock.
Yes. Well, you can have wine. Leadr Podcast is casual. We can do whatever we want. Feel free to indulge. You will not offend me.
That's cool.
All right. Well, let's talk about our origin story first and foremost, because it's short, but it's also a good sign of LinkedIn and why people should be active on LinkedIn and why people should actually use it for the intention that it's supposed to be there for, which is networking. So I think my understanding of how we connected, I don't know if I reached out to you originally on like a message or a direct message, but I think I saw you post something, an article, and I'm always intrigued by people who write really well. Even if it's with the aid of AI. I mean, I think everyone pretty much uses AI at this point, but I remember seeing something and I thought that's pretty unique and original. And you had a really strong opinion about a few things that I agreed with. So I think at that point, I might have reached out to you. I can't remember the actual origin.
Yeah, no,
Something
I
to
think
that effect.
it was when I think I posted my why most medtech companies fail, startups fail.
Yes.
And then you reached out and, I actually don't use AI to write my articles. I actually don't. And the reason for that is that, I get into a kind of weird flow. But yeah, so I wrote that article and then you reached out to me. We connected and then we DM'd and we realized we're both in the same space with the same kind of passion and a lot of the same background as well, which I thought was really great. And you're right. LinkedIn is a phenomenal way, if you use it the right way, to make your professional network grow in a really meaningful way.
I completely agree. I've met so many people on LinkedIn that I would never have crossed paths with in just normal day-to-day corporate USA. I mean, 2 of my employees are outside of the US. One's from Ireland, the other one's from London, and they both work for Tribe. And I met them through LinkedIn. And so it's just interesting that most people kind of, if they're not active on LinkedIn, they kind of poo-poo it. Like a lot of my clients aren't active on LinkedIn. And I'm like, that is shameful. If you're a B2B company, you're leaving money on the table. This is an upcoming social media post for me, but you're leaving money on the table. If you're a B2B or even a B2 corporate professional type person, you need to be on LinkedIn. And if you're not, today can be your day.
Yeah, I think some people are confused about what LinkedIn. I think everyone knows what Facebook is. I think they all know what Instagram is.
Yeah.
But I think there's a little confusion over LinkedIn. Mm-hmm. And again, I think one of the things that I noticed early on when I first went onto LinkedIn is that unless you get your feed set up right and let the algorithms do their work, it's a little bit confusing at first. And if you don't put a little bit of effort and time into it and build your network and start your base of network going, the algorithm can't work it out. And I think that's what happens with people. They dip in and then they dip out.
A lot of sponsored stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. They don't let the system get going well enough. I mean, I went from, I think it was 1,000 followers to 5,000. I'm at 5,200, in like 3 or 4 weeks.
That's crazy. Yeah.
But it took a while. Initially it was not working out who the right connections were. what I'd say now is the algorithms behind it seem to be really good at working out the right connections. You know, I'm not getting a lot of electric car people on my feed.
Yes.
It's good.
Yeah.
It's good.
No, I agree. I think both of us are on a very similar path with LinkedIn. I think we're both using it in the right way. And anyway, the whole reason I'm bringing up LinkedIn, we certainly are not getting paid to promote LinkedIn, but that's how we met. And I think that, you know, most of my guest speakers I had some connection with in the past. I either worked with them or for them, or they worked for me. But this was purely based out of just my admiration for your writing and your knowledge of this space, specifically around robotics, which obviously I have a massive background in as well.
Huge
and I think I picked up the phone and we had a call about it.
There definitely is a thing about camaraderie with past experiences. And, you know, we've talked about this a little bit before, which is, you know, there's a lot of people out there in different sectors who kind of talk about stuff or write about stuff that maybe, you know, don't have a real in-depth knowledge. But what I was impressed when we talked was you've actually, you know, you've walked that road. You've done that road in robotics, and a lot of people don't get it. But there's a little badge there, especially in the earlier days when it was really, really tough. So yeah,
it is. I think it still is
very tough. Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Tough.
Well, let's talk about that really quick. I know it's kind of off what we talked about. I do want to talk about your leadership journey and just kind of your overall background, because you're obviously really good at marketing. And I'm not saying that that's taking away from your actual credibility here, but you're not only credible, but you are also good at making yourself not only best, but best known, which are two things that I always talk to clients about. It's better to be best known than best, but if you can be both, great. So before we get into the leadership story and kind of your overall origin story, I do want to kind of touch on what you just talked about. So robotics is obviously a big deal, right? And it always has been. And the funny thing is, when I worked for Intuitive, which was I left, you know, to start Tribe. So September of 2022 was my last month at Intuitive. And I've kind of, up until that point, we've always talked about at national sales meetings, impending competition, but no one's really been able to figure it out. You know, a lot of people had great marketing, big companies saying that they were going to come out with a robotic system that was going to rival Intuitive or rival Da Vinci. And it never came to pass, honestly. And most of them, I think, underestimated innovation that needs to get put into your system in order to get FDA approval. And so oftentimes things got kicked back because of FDA. And really, by the time I left Intuitive, they didn't have a physical commercial competitor, which the entire 12 years I was there was a monopoly. So it's now fun to, you know, I'm not there, but I'm watching with popcorn, obviously still a shareholder, but I am just fascinated by all of these companies all trying to dip their toe in robotics. And I know you and I have talked about this. So what are your thoughts about that in general? I know you have a big background, just like I do, in robotics, but what are your thoughts on just the fascination of robotics and the noise in this market right now?
I think there's a lot of noise around it because Intuitive, if you look at them as a company, you know, they've not been acquired in and become big because they were acquired by an already big company. They've actually grown a business which is, you know, basically almost the same size as Medtronic's entire portfolio from scratch. And a hard graft, you know, 25 years of hard graft. I mean, they nearly went under 2 or 3 times in the time. So people have seen it as a little bit of a gold mine. I think they've seen it as, oh, you know, and especially what I think people forget a little bit is the development time of robotics. So most of the robots you're seeing on the market that are emerging today have been around since 2012 or 2014.
Yep.
So
that's going to be a problem.
That's going to be a problem. and I think that, you know, back then everyone saw it as a huge gold rush. And then they saw things like the amount of investment pouring into and just everybody went off to go and do it. And I think there's going to be a lot of train wrecks in the coming 5 years, just where, you know, the idea didn't quite pan out or the money ran out. Well, that'll be probably two of the things that are going to happen. But I think everybody wants to be in there, and investors would still like to work out how you get part of robotic, because it's the future, right? I don't think I've met a surgeon in the last 2 or 3 years that still says, "Oh, no one's going to use a robot." That's kind of just
early days. That they definitely said that. I mean, I got told that every day. That it was a marketing gimmick. That it was not clinically superior. That they could do a gallbladder in 15 minutes with lapsticks or all the things. I've heard it all. But yes, but yes, now and I think one of us needs to write an article. Our next article title should be Gold Rush of Robotics, because that's what it is.
It is. And again, and I think there is, there's huge space to go after in robotics in all sectors of it, be that the intuitive style or endovascular or neuro or some of the other emerging robotic areas in healthcare. There is huge money in it. And what they're also in there, I think it's one of the things where it's not just about, you won't just get money out of this. There is actually patient benefit, and there's healthcare benefit, and there's cost benefit to healthcare systems if it's applied in the right way. So I think it'll be a win-win-win for everybody. And as we move more to a digital world where digital health becomes bigger and bigger, I mean, putting a robot between the surgeon or the caregiver and the patient, there's just a logic to it, right? So the whole thing just sort of comes together. So I think it's just going to accelerate and accelerate.
Okay, so let's talk about your background, and also, obviously you have a robotics background just like I do. But let's talk about your origin story and how you got to current day, and then I have a bunch of other stuff I want to talk to you about, specifically around MedTech startups. But let's talk about this first. Cool,
and I hope you'll find my origin story quite amusing, actually, because it's quite bizarre.
I can't wait.
So I actually did a degree in physiology, which is a part of medicine. For those that don't know, it's a part of medicine. It's not a medical degree. It's understanding the human body when it actually works properly. And like most students, I came out of college pretty broke, as you do, and in need of money. And I actually went to work on a building site, and I was really enjoying myself hodding bricks up ladders and, building walls and stuff. And I was enjoying it. But I thought at some point, I'm really going to need to get some money here. And part of my degree was in pharmacology. So it just seemed natural to me to go towards the pharmacy side of things.
Yeah.
And you got to remember, there were no computers back in those days. There were no mobile phones when I was hodding bricks up and down. I'm talking really early on. I'm talking really, well, not even early 90s. It's 89. So it's in the 80s, end of the 80s.
I get it. I graduated high school in 89.
So the problem with this was that I went for several pharma jobs, and I looked about 12 years old, and I didn't have my own suit. I had to borrow a friend's suit and nice shoes. I only had my shoes that were covered in plaster from working in the building site.
Oh my gosh.
And what they would do is the agency would send me faxes about the interviews. So I got a fax to go for this interview, for a drug interview. And one of the builders knocked his tea all over the fax. So all I could read was the time, the date, the place, and 2 words. And I thought, okay, that's enough. So I read what I could. And I got on the train and I went down there and I go into this job interview, and it was, I'll tell you the full story, because the actual, it's worse than you can imagine. So my hair used to be really, really long, and I looked so scruffy wearing somebody else's suit. I had no coat. It was raining. I got off the train in the wrong place, and I was drenched, and I went running down the road to try and find this place, and I fell over, and I covered myself in head to foot in mud. This is going for the interview. So I walk into the office, and I think they thought I was going to rob them when I walked in.
With long hair and mud all over you?
Yeah, I was. It was just a mess. And I walked in, there was an amazing guy called David Follows, who I still love to this day. He's just an awesome guy. And I sort of went in, and part of the problem was, he said, well, why do you want the job? And I said, because you have 2 amazingly good drugs. You have one drug called Vicryl and one drug called Proline. And they're amazing drugs. And this guy obviously just looks back at me, because you should know they're sutures.
Yeah.
They're not drugs.
I was thinking in my brain, I'm like, vicral suture or vicral. I thought, well, that's interesting that they named it after the sutures.
No, it was the sutures. And it was actually because they'd sent me the wrong job interview. And this was one for Ethicon.
Okay.
So I went in and he said, there's several problems here. And he was such a great guy. And he said, where do you live? And at that time I said, Stoke-on-Trent. He said, that's strange. I live there. So that was the great connection, right? Connect with people, always connect on something.
Right.
He said, number one, they're not drugs, they're sutures. Number two, this is not even an interview for the suture company. This is for something called mechanical staplers, which they were bringing out.
Right.
And he said, number three is we don't employ anybody under 25. So that was the whole start of my journey. And I managed to convince this guy because, he basically asked me to say what I thought. And very quickly I understood what the stapler was for. I understood how it would work. And the long story short is that I sort of lied my way into it because we said on my application, because he said, all right, we'll put that you're 25 for the HR for now. And, so that's how I actually got into that's how I got into the medical device industry. So was that Ethicon Endo? Yeah, it didn't even exist, Ethicon Endo, back in those days. It was just Ethicon.
Oh,
it was before Endo existed. So I was like one of the first people who sold mechanical staplers, and I'm talking about in the early mechanical staplers, which is probably quite embarrassing for Ethicon nowadays to look back on some of those early staplers. And then we went through the whole revolution of Ethicon Endo and the growth there. And it was just talk about being a brilliant time in history in medical devices. It was just an amazing time. There was US Surgical, and I was very sad to hear about Leon Hirsch the other day. I was very sad. He was actually a person I admired quite a lot. But it was that amazing thing where you had the Ethicon versus the US Surgical, and it was like real head to head. And there was just that, it was a whole amazing period that'll never be repeated again, I don't think, in the medical device industry. So that's where I cut my teeth, started off in, and I did, the usual things, sales, regional management, marketing management. And then I did, I started a division with a lady called Sandra Rash-Vantelberg, who, again, fantastic lady, really, really smart cookie. And we set up a cardiovascular division that a lot of people probably don't even remember that got set up in Ethicon Endosurgery, and it was called Cardiovations. Oh, I remember Cardiovations. Yeah, so I had the pleasure of naming it. You talk about marketing, that's kind of where I really got my marketing going. So I named Cardiovations and sort of built that name and that brand, worked with a guy called Guy Lebeau, who ran the division. And that was my first interaction with robots, because we were doing cardiovascular and we were assessing for beating heart and basically heart port style, which we bought in the end. We bought heart port in the end. But we were looking at robots, and back in the day it was Zeus. So I used to go to Tony D'Souza in London, who was a great surgeon in London, who actually used to work for the mighty Magda Yacoub, who was one of the best surgeons in the world ever. Okay. And we went there to watch Tony doing the very first kind of cardiac procedures with Zeus. And then I went to Dresden to go and watch the Da Vinci S. At the time, it was the S. So that was kind of my first to robotics, and we were assessing them whether they should be bought by a certain company, and they weren't, which I think is a good thing for the industry, by the way, that they weren't bought, because I think that's why they've done well. But then I did shifted over to GynaeCare. I got the chance to move to Rome with GynaeCare. Great, another phenomenal leader that I just admire so much, called Laura Angelini. She's just, brilliant. And if Laura, I hope, would be watching, would just say hi to you, because she was just phenomenal. Taught me so much in business. Really great leader. And then I was there for a few years. We did the whole things like meshes and ThermaChoice and all those great things. And then I got sort of a phone call out of the blue from California from a guy called Brad Sharp, who still is in the industry now, actually Irvine, so not far from you. Yeah. And it was a cardiovascular company that was looking to do a heart support device called Orchis Medical, which was a really cool device. And that was my first foray into startups. So I'd done 16 years in J&J, 2006. I just said, I'm out of here. And that was really weird. So that was a really weird moment, because people said to me, you're on a rocket course through J&J. You can do whatever you want in J&J. Why on earth would you go and do startups? And
I know why, but
yeah,
having worked at J&J, I'm very aware, but yes, no regrets, right?
No, I love J&J Speech. I thought it was one of the best universities I ever went through. It was an amazing learning experience, and I learned a lot at J&J. But I realized at that point, and that's what I write about a lot, which is you think you're doing startups, the Cardiovations and the kind. It feels like you're doing a startup in J&J, but it's not a real startup.
You've still got a big bank. Yeah.
And you've got a fallback, and it's just not the same. So I really wanted to go and try the genuine sort of California hardcore startup. And I did. And that was probably the moment that I came out of the company and realized after 16 years, I actually knew nothing about medical devices.
Well, J&J, it's such a big company. You can kind of get lost in that. And you're not having to wear a ton of hats, I'm assuming.
No.
Because there's so many people, so many resources that you're not really having to act as if you're a startup.
And that's part of it. That was a huge wake up call for me. And again, if anyone's coming out of the companies, show a little bit of humility and go and do some time helping in a company. Don't try and run one, would be one of my big pieces of advice, because the learning curve is huge. It's just simple things. And you've been through it, right? Setting up a company.
Yeah.
Setting up a hiring structure.
Yep.
They seem small things, but they take time, take effort, they take skill. And when you're trying to build a product company from scratch, very few people have actually gone and set up a quality system. Very few people. Or a regulatory system. Or any system. You inherit them and then adapt them.
Yep. And there's also we recorded another episode on Tuesday, and it was a former colleague of mine at Intuitive, and she's now CEO at a startup. And we were reflecting on all the choices you have to make for the company and where you should be spending your time versus where you get pulled in. And so there's a lot that goes into. Many founders come from this engineer mindset. They have a great widget or mousetrap or product, but they don't understand the evolution of that, like the go-to-market strategy, the commercialization strategy, the upstream marketing, the downstream marketing, the brand strategy, everything in between. There's a lot. And then there's the whole regulatory, like you mentioned, all upstream, product dev, road mapping, LRM, the whole Monty, the investment rounds. There's so much that, you just basically have to hire really smart people. And that's what most people do. But it is a lot.
It can be very daunting. And again, I'm so glad that when I went to AUKUS, I actually did 3.5, 4 years within a startup before I went and then set up a startup. Yeah. Because I learned all those things. You just talked about it eloquently there, that it's a massive things. And again, it's just not things you're exposed to generally in a big company. Big companies have a huge merit of what they do and they're very good. But I wanted to do that. So I came out and I did several startups in California, and, we managed to, as Brad, one of my partners in it, says, we managed to smash a few into the ground with spectacular results. And we managed to flip some and move some on. And you learn from the smashing them as much as you do succeeding in them.
This is all super interesting. You obviously have a huge pedigree in startup, but I also want to talk about your time at CMR. So you went from startup to CMR. Is that correct?
Yeah. So in the interim, I went to an orthopedics company in between, which was a biologic orthopedics to do sports medicine and biologics. Did a lot of work there for them, helped them. And then I sort of retired in a way and sort of said, I'm quitting. I'm had enough. And Martin Frost, who is, unless you've met Martin, he is...
I don't know. No.
Yeah. Okay. So he is one of the most fun, amazing guys you'll ever meet. Hard to describe. Unless you meet him, it's very hard to describe Martin, but he's super, super smart. He used to run Sagentia, which was a consulting company in Cambridge. He's also one of the guys who did M-Pesa, which is the currency for Africa, to help Africans send money to each other. He's done a lot of really, really good and amazing things, Martin. And he kind of convinced me to come and look at, come and see this robot and help them out, give them some commercial insights. It was a very startup. I mean, they were up in these, and I know if Patrick Pordage is watching now, who was the head of marketing when I was there. He hates it when we say that they were converted pig sheds, but that's what they were. They were pig sheds that were converted into sort of industrial units, and CMR started up in these pig sheds in a beautiful location in Cambridge. What was amazing about that was it was the first time that I'd seen really in Europe a startup that was getting to the thinking and the ability like a startup in California. And that's what Europe had been missing for a really long time, and it still misses it a lot today. Cambridge is becoming one of the clusters where it's happening. But that was where I thought, okay, they've definitely kind of got the startup vibe going here. And it was nice, the barbecues and the cycling and all that kind of good stuff. But it was super startup when I went there. It was not much more than a very basic prototype. But I remember going there and coming out one of the few people who came out of big business. It was like a goldfish bowl. So they had all their R&D out in a goldfish bowl where anyone could have walked up and taken photographs of it. It was just like bizarre.
They just didn't know.
Yeah. And again, what you don't know, you don't know. And you come out of the Cambridge, you can't imagine that people will come in and spy on your equipment and take photographs of it and take your ideas and steal them. They just, it was like a beautiful naivety. I just loved the people there because it was such an amazing moment in the history again, where I thought, okay, this is another changer. This is a big changer. Yeah. So I consulted for them for 3 and a bit years, just giving them advice. And then in 2017, Martin said, we're ready to go commercial in 2018, which they weren't, but they thought they were ready to go commercial.
They were, yeah.
And it was really nice. And I went there, and part of my job was to find them a chief commercial officer, because I just said I just don't want to work full time because I know what it involves and I know myself. So if I get involved, I'm 24/7, right? And my family feels that very heavily. So I tried so many people to go and be the chief commercial officer, and they just kept saying no, no, no. And in the end, they convinced me to join them. So I joined them full time in November 2017, which I thought was going to be, and I sort of talked with Martin and said, look, I'll do this for 6 months until you find someone.
Yeah.
Roll on 6 years later. And, we launched the system, which was an amazing experience. Got it to just under 150 systems worldwide. Never gave one away. Not one. We sold them all. And created, I hope, I like to think of it in my own mind that, I came up with some business models that kind of changed the industry a little bit. The service model that we created and rolled out, we think changed it a bit. So, yeah.
I bet you learned a ton in that experience. And now you're back being retired, correct?
Well, I keep trying.
Retired, quote unquote. You're more active on LinkedIn than I am.
Yeah. One of the secrets that I learned, so I'm going to give you a little bit of a secret here, is that my wife's in the entertainment industry, and that always sounds bad when I say it that way. My wife is a singer, and I've been running her social media and her Facebook, and so I've been behind that for nearly 10 years. And when you do that, you learn about how scheduling of posts, how you make bulk content. So on one day, you can make 6 pieces of content. Line them up and then get them out. And I think, anyone who's using things like LinkedIn or Facebook or whatever for their professional side, I definitely recommend you do bulk uploads and then a lot of scheduling to go out. And you've probably got the same, right?
Well, we actually are a social media agency in addition to several other digital marketing solutions. But yes, we actually are launching software that has social media content planners in it. Soon, March 1st is the goal. But yes, we do use scheduled content planners. Right now we're using Cloud Campaign and we love it. Yeah. I'm a big fan of batch creating. No one wants to painfully schedule and record content every single day. You do it all at once when you're looking great, and you batch it out and you reschedule it. Yes.
So
These are facts.
seldom I think I'm looking great to go on these things.
Well,
but
women care.
You're different. You're in a different league on that. So but for me personally, it's what I'm trying to do is, I mean, I've got two older daughters, but I've also got two very young boys, 2 and 4. So part of my decision again to really sort of back off a little bit from it's the flying around the world that drove me mad. Twice around the world in a month is just insanity. And when you're in a startup, and this is what I will advise everyone in a startup, it is 24/7. There is no off button, right?
Yep.
And part of what I've tried to do is
even when you go on vacation, if you're not working, then your company is not moving forward. It's literally on pause when you leave if you don't engage. Yes.
Yeah. And what people don't realize, or well, maybe they are realizing more now, and maybe that's just me generalizing, that consumption also it can take over your life for a decade. The old days of the pre-2008 crash of where the VC comes in, flips it out. 3 years later, the IP and everything gets sold to a big company, and you all celebrate on a yacht and champagne in Newport Beach.
Yeah.
Those days are gone, right? It's 10 years of slog. The average startup now exits average, if they survive, in 10 years. And there's a lot of out there, especially even in the robotic space, that they're 12 years in and 24/7 for a decade, flying around the world and being insanely busy with the stress, because if it goes under, 500 people go home. You fire 500 people. And I, in previous startups, I've, closed a company and laid off hundreds of people. It's not pretty and it's not fun on that side. So I kind of got to the stage where I wouldn't say it's burnout, but it was sensible enough that, my wife was wise enough to say to me, time for you really seriously now to back off. Yeah. So the sort of the plan is that, Mondays and Fridays for me are more or less blocked. I don't work on a Monday and Friday. I schedule a Tuesday, a Wednesday, and a Thursday.
Perfect.
Because
I should subscribe to the same calendar.
But the thing that I think I'm learning is, and this is again, the beauty of life is that you learn every single day. I'm actually being as efficient, and that's why I'm quite pleased that you said I'm being efficient on LinkedIn, because I feel I'm being as efficient in 3 days and getting the same, if not more work done than I used to get done in 5 days. And I was pretty intense in 5 days, but somehow it seems like the number of days that you work doesn't matter. So maybe there's something in this 4-day work week thing.
Yeah. I have that book, by the way. What are the biggest challenges you see? You're really in tune with this industry. What do you think they are right now in this MedTech startup world?
I think one of the problems is the funding environment at the minute. So there's been a real shift in sort of the risk appetite of VCs. And VCs, they were really part of the lifeblood of getting a lot of these, and it's venture, as in adventurous capital. They've kind of drifted into you'd be amazed how many calls from people who come through my course who I sit on and I help to advise them on these calls. And you have VCs saying, we like to get in early and we like to get you, when it's still really, there's a lot of risk in there, but you've not got your regulatory yet. You've not got 1,000 patients. You've not already got a customer base and you've not already got 10 million in sales. We can't invest in you. And it's kind of this really weird
total
oxymoron. It is complete contradiction in terms. And I remember the old days where, you could almost go in with a napkin in Sand Hill Road and, if you were charming enough, you could, wheedle $5 million out of 3 Arch or somebody.
Right.
You can't do that anymore. And I think one of the problems is that the entire risk funding money that you need in startups, because, still 75 to 80% fail, which I want to change, by the way, and we'll talk about that. But that whole risk capital now has become angel investors who seem to be the only ones who do it. And there's lots of rules that are now starting on angel investors, and they're changing the way of, you've probably seen that what it takes to be an angel, and therefore they're changing the scale of it, which very interestingly puts women at a big disadvantage by the way of becoming angel investors. And maybe that's another thing for a podcast, which is how it's very highly dominated by the males from the investment side and from the actual startup side. And having two daughters who one of them would like to do startups, it's a topic that hits home really close. So I think the funding of VCs has become the problem. They've shifted more towards what I think looks like more like a private equity sort of risk
more
profile.
Of a conservative, wanting to make sure there's really zero risk. Yeah.
And the whole thing about startups is it's all about risk. You can't have innovation of this type without risk. And the problem that's then creating is that there's a culture within the startup industry that people, they're scared to go and ask for money because they haven't got everything lined up and everything ready and everything done early on. And they're scared to go and ask for large amounts of money. When people used to go and ask for 5 million, they're now asking for 150,000. And you can't do anything with 150,000.
No.
Nothing.
No, you burn through that very quickly. Yeah. On the note of challenges in this MedTech startup space, obviously I work with them all day long. And yes, I agree with you on the investment side of it. That is definitely a big deal. In fact, this last 2 weeks, our agency is entirely invested, pun intended, in investor decks right now.
Yeah.
And just helping people really tell their story. Because I think what people minimize and underestimate is when you get your day in court, when you're up at bat to give your pitch, you really have to know your stuff. And not just your product, features, and benefits. Investors do not care. They don't care. Anything to do with features and benefits or product-centric conversations, nobody cares. Unless it's so innovative that is your proposition. Yeah. But the bigger part of it is the total addressable market, the competitive landscape. How do you stand out amongst the others? Why should they invest in you versus someone else? What is the problem you're trying to solve? Is it big enough to matter? And all of those things have to do with how they approach their brand and their go-to-market strategy. And that seems to be lacking. And then I think another thing that back to, you were talking about Gary earlier, that he always did with Intuitive is he had such a really strong conviction about patients first always. And that was from the initial thread of Intuitive. And so it really, I wasn't around when they were in their early investment stage, but I guarantee that was a big part of the conversation is that this is better for patients. So you have to really understand your mission, your vision, your unique value proposition as a founder. And then help, hire an agency like Tribe where we help you pull that out. But you definitely have to have some foundational values of where you want to take this company and what kind of big problem you're trying to solve. And that seems to be lacking too. In addition to the investors, holding their pennies close, I would say that the people going and pitching aren't fully prepared to have that conversation either.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. And I talk a huge amount of this. And probably in the first third of my course that I run, it talks about this as how that can't be a problem. So you have to ask, why is this such a problem? Mm-hmm. And part of the reason is the people who start the startups. So if you're a physician or a clinician that's got the great idea and medicine very well and surgery very well, there seems to be an automatic assumption that you also then know how to run a startup medical device business. And it's not true. I mean, it's a profession. A lot of people just think, well, it's just have a go. I'll just set up a company and have a go. It's one of the most regulated and difficult businesses in the world as a big company like a J&J or a Medtronic. Yet you think you can go and do the second thing, which is a startup, which is really hard in the most regulated industry in the world. Yeah, I find that quite bizarre quite often. And then you wonder why they get into trouble very early on and why they can't raise money and they don't understand brand. The classic for me is when I see a pitch deck, and I've seen actually some just recently, which is that sort of weird blue background with the yellow writing that they use at congresses to do their abstracts from 19 sort of the year 2000.
Yeah. I know.
And
I know. It's hard.
What actually then happens is the commercial becomes really hard because now you're trying to push a boulder up a hill. That's the basic thing of
and
what
make
happens.
your sales reps have to push the boulder up the hill that's not been vetted by anyone, that is actually something that people want to buy.
Exactly. And it's not, again, if it's not in your DNA because, you're a research person or you're a physician or something, it's just not what you do on a day-to-day basis. Go and listen and get educated. And again, I'm going to come on my course. Just come and listen to it. It'll give you a step-by-step of the things you need to do. And one of the things you need to do is reach out to people like Tribe and use their experience and their professionalism. Because you're trying to, if you went out and you were trying to ask some friends to give you, I don't know, $1,000 for a little project that you've got at home. Okay. You think of how much effort you're going to put into that to try and make it look pretty and nice. And you probably do you're going to be asking for millions of dollars from professionals, and people don't even put the effort in that they'd ask $1,000 to do a project. I find it bizarre.
It is. Yeah. But I think what's bizarre is that people maybe don't have self-awareness around where their strengths are. A couple calls ago or a couple podcasts ago, we talked about the zone of genius in this book, The Big Leap by Gay Hendricks. And I think, most founders are probably physicians and or engineers or both.
Yep.
And they do have great innovations, great concepts. They see a problem that needs to be solved. But what they're really not focusing on is bringing on people that are in other zones of genius. Maybe their zone of genius is in innovation, but, marketing's tough. It's hard. And by the way, in this new digital world, algorithms change daily. And it's not just about social media. It's about blogging. And our tagline at Tribe is make your brand a verb, because there's a multi-channel spoke of marketing. It's not just one. It's not social. It's not blogging. It's not podcasting. It's all of it. And it all has to be active at all times. And that takes strategy and it takes endurance, but it also takes, professionals, people that understand it. It's not difficult for either of us. We understand that. But for a founder and an innovator or an engineer, they may not, and they don't need to. I don't want to know everything either. I hire really smart people that already know it. I don't have to know everything. All right. Well, I could talk about these types of topics all day long. First of all, I want to make sure everyone knows how to find your course. So what's the website?
Yes, it's pretty easy because it's about how to start up in MedTech. So it's called howtostartupinmedtech.com. Which I thought was try and be logical as I could.
Way to throw SEO in your URL too.
Exactly. So yes, so I just put that on as a course. And again, let me give a little bit of the motivation of why I'm doing it, because I don't need to do it.
Yeah.
But I want to do it. And part of it is, I'm 33 years into this industry. And I'm still shocked every day that we have so many failures of startups in MedTech. It's over 75%. And some people said to me it's actually 90% in some areas of MedTech, which is just billions of dollars and human lives and time wasted when you fail. And it's not totally wasted because you learn from it, of course. So somebody said to me, well, so now you're sort of semi-retiring. What's your goal? What do you want to do? And I said, I want to make the failure rate of MedTech startups less crap.
That's great.
So if I could take us from 75% and drop us to 50, okay,
50 would
still
be
not brilliant, but 25% differential is massive. And I think we can do it. You said it early on, and I loved what you said because it resonates so deeply with me, which is if you early on do all the right research and ask the right questions, that 25% of ideas that fail might just never happen in the first place. You have the idea and you work out that it's a great idea, but it's not a business. It's a great idea, but I'll never actually sell it to people. And if we could just say, okay, don't do that one and go and get another idea and do a startup in something that people really love, need, want, desire, etc. I think we can change the dial on that 25% quickly just by having a killing filter so early on. And again, if people come to professionals and ask them, help me to assess this. Help me to assess this early on. Before
and not be tied to it so much that you're unwilling to hear what the market is telling you.
Exactly. Exactly. There was a saying, and I forget who came up with a saying, but we used it all the time in a lot of our companies, which is, it's not a great saying, but it's nobody has an ugly baby, right? My kids are the most beautiful children in the world. Okay. I've got a friend who's actually got a pretty ugly kid. So no, but nobody does, your own kids, you love them, right? You love them so much. And nobody wants to tell you if your kid's not good looking or not smart or anything, because that's how human beings work. So with this syndrome though, when the idea becomes your baby, it's very hard to be completely objective about it. You start becoming very subjective. And if you ask the wrong people, which is what most people do, they go and ask friends and colleagues and people who would like to invest in it. Massive human biases. You end up with everybody saying, oh, it's an amazing idea. It's amazing. It's amazing. But if you ask the right people, they'd say, no, that's garbage. Don't waste another second on it. And I think we owe it to help people to get that, because you may not want to hear it in the first few months of life of the project, first 6 months of the life of the project. But I guarantee you the day you go commercial, you'll fully understand it because it will hit you so hard.
Yes. There's no misinterpreting audio silence of people not responding to your social posts, to your sales reps. I mean, you're going to feel it. The response is going to come to you either way, but it's best to navigate it up front.
Yes.
And an old saying in sales, which both of us have backgrounds in, is the more no's you get, gets you closer to a yes. And so don't avoid objections. Don't avoid feedback. Don't avoid things that are telling you the truth, because it's actually getting you closer to the truth. And anyway, I could go on and on about market research. The final 3 questions that I have for all guest speakers on Leadr, I'll just fire around them to you. I want to know about your superpower. You only get one. A mentor that has shaped you, and then a book that you would recommend to all CEOs and MedTech startups and even people in the MedTech industry could benefit from. Fire away.
So my superpower, this has actually been told to me by several people, that I seem to have an ability to be able to assess the complicated, take really, really, really complex things in a split second. So it's a superpower. It's also a super weakness, by the way. So the superpower is I can take really complex things and boil them down very quickly, understand them, and then make it simple for people to understand. So that's one of my superpowers. What's the downside of that? Well, it is, and it's not. So it's good unless I tame it and use it the right way. Because when you have that sort of ability, it's really easy to not take people with you. Because for me, it's like, that's just like so easy and obvious. And unless
you're like, I got it. I don't really need help in this.
Got it. Moved on. I'm already on the next thinking process. And that multiple times in my life has been, it's been a bane. And I think, I could bring people on here and I'd happily have them say, they'd probably slap me around a bit and say, this is what used to drive us mad about you. So again, if you've got that kind of ability to, get stuff in your head, the one thing I've learned over these years is you've got to take people with you. If you've got to get them on the journey with you, and they've got to bring them with you. And I have to be super, super careful about this, really careful, because for me, it's really easy to understand something, digest it, understand it, conceptualize. I can sort of see it in 3D and everything. And then I can make it very easy for people to understand. But then I can just think, well, of course, now it's easy to understand. How can they not have got it? So that's one. That's the superpower.
Yeah. What about a mentor?
So mentor, I've got multiple business mentors throughout my life that I've talked about, but there's actually the person who's been the biggest mentor to me is my mum, and I'll use my mum as the mentor, and that's because she's of Irish descent, very very clever lady, but not an educated lady, and she'd say that herself. You know, she's got street smarts, and what I think she taught me was several really important life lessons that can be applied in business in a really smart way. But she taught me about humor and how in humor in life, you've got to keep always funniness and humor because you'll bring people with you so much. If people think that, you know, if you're miserable and stuff, people just don't want to hang with you.
Right.
And being in a sales place, you know, you got to have a bit of gift of the gab and that. So she taught me that. She also taught me, you know, just massive, never give up and persistence. My mum will never give up at anything ever. She'll just keep going and going. She'll change direction and she'll find another way to do it. So she taught me that really as a life lesson that I take through business really, really well. And I think one of the most important lessons she taught me really early on was don't suffer fools. Don't argue with fools.
I love it.
Yeah.
Don't associate with fools.
Don't associate with them.
What the Bible says.
Yeah. To get the toxic people out of your life. Stay away from the fools. But the thing she said to me is, don't waste your breath arguing with a fool. Yes. Because you can't change a fool. And that has stayed with me, which is I try not to do that anymore. I don't think I've ever done it because she taught me as well. So she's just been a life mentor, and they bleed into business, obviously. But those basic lessons that she kind of taught me throughout my life, she's been a great mentor on that.
Oh, I love that. Is she still with us?
Yes, she is. Yes.
So hopefully she listens to this podcast.
She listens to a lot of my stuff. She'll tell me to shut up and don't say that again. That's what she'll say. But that's just how she is, right? So, but she's great on that sort of stuff. And again, you know, I think one of the things, you asked the question about mentors. I think they're so important. And again, I don't know if people really go and ask enough people to be a mentor. Mm-hmm. They just don't do it.
I've lived my whole life in very strong belief of having mentors. I've had mentors since I was in my early 20s, and I have 20-year-old twins, boys right now. And I definitely need to start helping them find like their first mentor, because I think they're so important in life.
Yeah.
Both in personal and professional, you need both. But people that'll tell you the truth, you know, which is kind of what we're talking about as a startup. You need people in your camp that will tell you the truth. Yes. And know that they're coming from a place of kindness and with the best intent. They're not there to tear you down. They're there to build you up and make you the best person you can be. So,
absolutely.
All right. Well, let's talk about the book. What is the book on Steve's bookshelf right now that is going to impact all of our listeners?
And this is a book that's everyone, when they ask you, especially when they talk about a business book or whatever, it's not a business book, but it's a book that I believe in the startup world. If you read it, so I read it the first time when I was 11 years old. It's actually The Hobbit. I believe
I love The Hobbit.
Yeah. I believe it's one of the best business books you'll ever read. And people never read it as a business book. But if you look at it, it's about that startup adventure where a group of people come together, go on a very difficult road. There's a lot of problems that they have to overcome. But in the end, they get the gold and bring it home, right? I mean, that's in a very basic way. But what it's really about for me as well is how that's done with fantasy. And I think that's important. When you do a startup, you have to have a lot of fantasy and imagination and hope and all kinds of things that when I read The Hobbit, I read it quite often still. But as you go through your life, you read it in different ways. And one day it hit me in about 2008 when I read it again. And I thought, this is a business book. This is a startup. But this is the journey of a guy doing a startup. that's why I read it. Bizarre, but there we go.
This will be the only time I get that as an answer, which I love. By the way, I'm a huge fantasy sci-fi person. In fact, we have a startup coming up for software, and we're naming it after Harry Potter, which I'm a huge fan of as well. The company is called Lumos. And anyone that's a Harry Potter fan knows that that's when he waves the wand of light. And so we're hoping to shed light on people's business opportunities by having a much better machine to build their lead flow in. But not to get off on that, but I am a big fan of Hobbit, all fantasy sci-fi. I'm also a big fan of Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones, all the things.
Excellent.
But maybe I need to go back and watch it from that lens now, or read it from that lens. I hadn't really thought through that, but I think it's a good call out. So, all right. Well, thank you for attending this in wine hour. What'd you call it? Wine o'clock?
Yes. Wine o'clock, yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, anyway, it was a pleasure to finally meet you in person virtually. And thank you again for your time today.
No, thank you very much for having me on. I love everything you're doing. And I will definitely, I've said it before, I'm going to be sending a lot of people your way, because I think the stuff that you do is foundational and fundamental for what any startup needs, and it'll lead them to more success. So looking forward to working together.